and welcome to another Smaulgld live stream. Today is June 14th, 2018, and the topic of today's live stream is the IG report that came out today. We have an analysis titled Comey / FBI not biased. They just did things differently. We're going to go through the IG report. I've read most of it. It's 500 pages. And we're going to talk about how the media prepared for this event, how they covered it, and how they reacted to the IG report and its context. And we'll go through the chronology of how that happened. And I've also got some interesting tidbits from the report. We'll go through those as well. But first, let's just take a look at what happened during the day. Gold closed at 1301. Up about $4 or $5. Silver was a big performer. At one point, it was up to $17.29 on the day, closed at $17.14, so it was up about 15 cents. The dollar had a huge day. The dollar index soaring up to nearly 95, and that was because the ECB made their announcement today, and they gave a timetable for ending their quantitative easing program. They announced that they would probably end it by December this year, and that they would take down the QE from about $30 billion a month to $15 billion a month as part of their tapering. And remember, they're buying corporate bonds. It's a very big program that the ECB has engaged in. I think the shocker for a lot was that they were going to leave rates alone until mid-2019. Now, that's an indicator to people that the economy isn't doing that well that they can afford to put interest rates higher. It also means that the Fed will be able to, hello Poppy Stuff, thanks for joining. The Fed will be able to continue their rate hikes and put some further distance between themselves, the Bank of Japan, the ECB, Bank of England, all which have negative or zero interest rates. Right now, I think the Fed fund rate, having raised rates 7 times, quarter point is at 175. So the Fed could be a 2.25% rate, interest rate, Fed funds rate, by the time that the ECB decides to stop. Could be even higher. They think they'll do 2 more this year. That'll take them to 2.25. And maybe during 2019, the Fed, it may hold off, and let's say they raise it once or twice during that year. You could have the Fed's fund rate almost 3 percentage points ahead of their central bank counterparts. All right. Let's get to what happened with the IG report. Before it came out, and you know this is going to happen, there's going to be leaks, and the leaks are always strategic. They leak them to who they want to hear, and the leaks this time went to Bloomberg and to the New York Times. And the main takeaway that they wanted to dominate the discussion and the reading of this document when it came out was, well, I'll read from it. The conclusion, basically, while we did not find that these decisions, they're talking about how the FBI handled the Hillary Clinton email investigation, were the result of political bias on Comey's part, we nevertheless concluded that by departing so clearly and dramatically from FBI and department norms, what they're saying is that they want everyone to know that Comey, the FBI, they weren't biased, even though they seem to do things a bit unorthodox. They seem to do things that were clearly and dramatically departures from FBI and the Department of Justice norms. Now, my first question when I saw that, which was the first thing I thought of, is, hold on a minute. First of all, everyone knows, or at least, we can't say knows, but there's been a lot of evidence showing, in Comey's own words, that there was some bias against Trump. We had the Strzok Page emails about hating Trump. McCabe first would blame Trump. So there was a lot of bias. At least there seemed to have been a lot of bias. But the Inspector General's report wanted to dispense with that. And that was basically the main takeaway. And that's what the media wanted to get out there. Like, sure, Comey had a hard time of it. He had tough decisions to make, but he was always above the fray. So was the department. We may have had some bad apples in there, but overall, the FBI did their job, and we're not going to second guess them. This made me feel it was almost just like with Comey's exoneration of Hillary Clinton. He went through the whole litany, and we're going to go through some of the bad stuff in the report. He went through everything Hillary Clinton had done wrong in that July 5th press release, saying that she had not turned over all the evidence, she had a private server, she wasn't authorized to have it. And then at the end of his whole litany, he says, but, we were not going to prosecute her because she didn't mean it and no reasonable prosecutor would bring the case. This IG report had almost the identical tone. Every time something bad came up, they made it sound like, but reasonable people, one might do it this way, one might do it that way. Well, we might not have given them immunity, but we didn't see the real problem in that. Well, we didn't have a grand jury, but there was a reason for that. We didn't want the grand jury to get classified information. And basically the report said this investigation was not done how other investigations were done, but they tried to make it sound as if, but that was their judgment, and maybe it was wrong, but the stench of it really was that what they did was wrong, but it wasn't that big of a deal. It wasn't that bad. Now my question is, before we get into the details, because what I'm doing is I'm giving you the chronology of how I reviewed it as I was watching the information come out. Now, you remember the press preps you for this event by distracting you, and then they try to get ahead of the story by telling you the leak, what they want you to focus on. Then the thing comes out, and then they have the reaction. The report comes out, and then they have the reaction. And it would follow a real big script. You had a real tight script. They had the leak. Then the report came out, and then they had the reaction to it and make sure they reinforced the leak, that this whole thing wasn't biased. And then Comey comes out with his tweet, and then Comey's already got penned, which he already had it ready, which means he already read the report, ready for the New York Times op-ed. They've already agreed to publish that. And then Christopher Wray at the FBI, he's already ready to come out and give a speech at the end of the day. So it's a very tight little package. It's a tight news cycle, and they ran it pretty well. Now, my question was, before we get into the chronology, is when I first saw this narrative that they were pushing, because it was in the report, that Comey wasn't biased, the FBI wasn't biased, what they never properly explained to me, even at the leak stage or even when I went and read the report, why would Comey deviate from the norm in handling the investigation? If he wasn't biased, what was his motivation to do things that just seemed so evident that they were going to allow Hillary Clinton to escape? If he wasn't biased, what was his motivation? The concept that he was insubordinate doesn't make any sense, because he was tacitly given permission by Loretta Lynch to basically come up with a recommendation that she would follow. So I don't go with the insubordination, that he was being some type of avant-garde FBI director. It looked to me like he was being biased. And I think, depending on your politics, it seems, not depending on your logic, if you think that Comey wasn't biased, it's because you don't like Trump and you like Hillary, and you want to believe that there was no bias and that the FBI is on the up and up. And if you like Trump, your natural inclination is to be that the fix was in. Now, my view on it is, just looking at it logically, it seems to be the report doesn't answer the question as to, they gave the examples of the bias in the report, but then they said, but they didn't act in accordance with their bias, which I can't believe that's the case. They mention what's in the emails, they mention the hostility towards Trump, but they make it sound like, but they still did their job, they held their heads high, and they didn't let that impact their work. Didn't seem to be the case, but all the news outlets, they jumped on that story. Bloomberg had it first, that this was no bias, and yeah, there's a little hand slap for Comey, deviated from the norms, but he's a professional, and he had that leeway. And who are we to second guess these guys, because he's the professional. He's the guy who was grappling with all this. He was almost a saint in what he had to go through. And he actually put in, we'll get to his tweet at the end, where he basically gets sanctimonious. We'll get to that in a second. Well, not in a second, but that's towards the end of the program when we get to the end of the day. So, first of all, besides not answering the question about bias, the report concludes there was no bias. Now, first of all, bias is an opinion. I don't know how you can conclude there was no bias. Bias can be inferred by how people act coupled with their words. And if you look at the words that they put in the report, that Stroke, Page, and McCabe talked about how much they hated Clinton, and then you see the result that they got, well, you can infer by their bias in their words, by their words that they were biased and that it did impact their work because they got the conclusion that they wanted to. So I didn't get an answer to that from reading the report. Then I also was wondering if Comey had no bias, what would they do with Loretta Lynch? And we'll see what happened with Loretta Lynch. And there was a bit of a disagreement between Comey's version and Loretta Lynch's version on whether Loretta Lynch told Comey to not call it a criminal investigation, but to call it a matter. So the first part came out. It was Bloomberg, and that is the part they wanted people to focus on. And that was going to guide the news even once the report came out. They didn't want people to focus on, and I'm going to give you some of the bad things that are in the report. They just wanted them to focus on that, because if you read the leak in advance, then you look for that part in the report when it comes out as a report, and then you repeat that. And if you're conditioned to do that, that just becomes the news cycle. The whole story is Comey isn't biased, the FBI isn't biased, and nothing to see here. Now, very quickly, you have some Republican congressmen who are on the ball, and they notice that, whoa, this doesn't sound right. So Representative Matt Gaetz, Andy Biggs, and Representative DeSantis, they sent a letter to the Inspector General Horowitz demanding to see all draft versions of the Clinton email report, of this Inspector General's report, because they're concerned that, look, Comey definitely had a crack at this. His lawyers had a crack at it. They looked at it. They massaged it. And also remember that Inspector General Horowitz, he works there. So they don't want to give the department a black eye. What they're trying to do is they're trying to restore the credibility of it, and they can't actually trash Comey, throw him under the bus. They might be able to throw Stroke under the bus, one guy and his paramour, but they're not going to throw the top people under the bus and then say we've got a clean house. What they're trying to do is they're playing politics, and they're trying to make this. They're trying to make it sound like we've got a control of this. Yes, there were some mistakes made, but it's not that bad, and let's just move on from here. And we'll see that when the new FBI director Wray had his press conference later in the day. So the Republicans want to see all the drafts. Now they'll probably stonewall on that. And I know just from doing contracts, a lot of times things are in contracts that never make the final draft, and they could be 100% against. Or different than the final. They can also be, and there's reasons why they get taken out. Certain things don't make it to the final contract. However, in this case, there should be some timeline as to if they ever do see all the drafts, what was in there, what wasn't in there. And I'd imagine a lot of exculpatory stuff was put in, or things that they didn't like were taken out. But maybe we won't know. We'll see. Then the next leak that came out, big leak, but again, the report had not been out yet. And this was the other one. They knew that when the report came out, people would find no Comey bias, no bias from the rest of the FBI, but they would eventually find this thing that basically FBI agent Stroke texted to Page when Page said something like, is Donald Trump going to win? Is Donald Trump going to win? And he said, nope, don't worry about it. We will stop it. So Maggie Haberman of the New York Times tweeted her equivalent of, uh-oh. She said, oh, man. And then she posted this thing. So this way, the shock value has been reported by the news media. They made sure they reported it first before someone dug it up from the alternative media and posted that, because now they're on. They've shown the two big things in the report that now, as this is coming out, I'm still thinking, but wait a minute. You're saying there's no bias. And I hadn't heard about this at this point. I hadn't heard that Strzok said we're going to stop Trump. I was just thinking, what's the basis for them to say there is no bias when there was already stuff in the public domain that showed bias? Well, this showed real bias. This didn't just show bias. This showed intent to actually use his position in the FBI to stop Trump. So they got that out of the way, and that was like the big deal for a lot of people. And the other big deal about that particular statement by Strzok was, as I mentioned, I hadn't heard of it, and I follow this pretty closely, but that's because it was never given to the Congress. So they asked for this stuff. They got this message. They got the question from Page. She said, is he going to be president? They didn't redact Strzok's response. They just didn't provide it. So again, this is what they can blame, and they can say, well, this was just a clerical error, or they can throw the guy who made the transcript under the bus, but they're not going to make this out to be a big deal. But it is a big deal because the words were, Page says to Strzok, Trump's not ever going to become president, right? Right? She's getting more excited. She puts question mark, exclamation point. And then Strzok says, no, big macho man, no, he's not. We'll stop it. So that was a big deal that came out. And the bigger deal, I think, is what we should have known that already. But the interesting thing is they had just put out in the news cycle an hour earlier that there was no bias. And now they're contradicting it with this particular thing. Now, Ron DeSantis is also I think he's a Republican congressman. He says, look, this thing about Trump isn't going to become president, right? And Strzok says, no, he's not. We'll stop it. He says, how come Rosenstein didn't disclose this to us when we asked for the text? So again, Rosenstein seems to be the guy holding this whole thing together here. Then the next thing that came out, was leaked, was that Comey used private Gmail address for official businesses. The interesting thing about Comey, he is investigating Hillary Clinton for using an unauthorized server for conducting official business, sensitive business, on non-government equipment. Meanwhile, Comey, it turns out, according to the IG report, he was using a private Gmail address for official business, not necessarily classified business. And then later, when I read the report, it wasn't just Comey. It seemed that Strzok, Page, and a few others were also using Gmail and private email that wasn't connected with the government's equipment and security. But they said in all those instances, nothing classified went across it. But it doesn't matter. I still think that what Comey says as the FBI director, whether it's classified or not, if a hacker gets it, he can use non-classified information to his or her benefit, or to his client's benefit, or government's benefit. So it's not a good idea that these guys, especially Comey, he's tasked to investigate or look into a matter about Hillary Clinton's email. And meanwhile, what is he doing? He's using Gmail himself. So what I realize is, wait a minute, maybe it isn't bias that led James Comey to exonerate Hillary Clinton. It was his empathy for someone else in government who was also using the non-government equipment and email and software to transmit government business. Yes. So then what happened? Well, there's another point here. In that says we'll stop it email from Strzok. Apparently, there's a second attorney on that thread, second FBI attorney, and they don't identify who he is. And this guy also says "Vive la résistance." So you can see this little cabal of people in the FBI are clearly infuriated that Trump might win, that Trump could have a chance of winning, and they're bitching amongst themselves about this, and they're still saying there's no bias. All right. So if you want to see the IG report, I'll tweet out. I think I did tweet out a link, but if anyone wants it, just email. I'll send it to you. But it's a 500-page report. You can take a look at it. Now, then I finally got my hands on the IG report. Everything I've just told you, I was following along with the news media and watching how they were dribbling out the information. Well, when it comes out, I immediately did what they wanted me to do. I went to the part to find the Stroke message about, no, we're going to stop him. I went to find the part about the Comey Gmails, use of Gmails. I went to find the part about no bias. First thing I looked at was, okay, so if Stroke is saying that he's going to stop Trump to his girlfriend Page, will there be a criminal referral on that, or will there be something? What does the Inspector General think of that? And here's where I realized the fix was in. And this is where everything became milquetoast and totally lame. So the words of the IG report, when they're talking about Strzok sending this to Page, this no, we're going to stop him, is while he has every right to have his political opinions, and they went on about how, that's the nature of the work, but then they have to be non-biased and so on. They then said that this is the big deal for Strzok. He might have potentially violated the FBI's offense code of conduct for sending such a message. So there you go. So basically, he wears his heart on his sleeve. He basically says, "Big man, he's gonna stop Trump." And the FBI they're gonna have to look into this to see if he might have violated the code of conduct. He shouldn't even have a job by now. Paige had the sense to leave; she quit, but Strzok is still there. He was involved, and it's unbelievable that they're gonna look into his code of conduct. So then I did a word search. How many times the word criminal appears in the report? 241 times. Trump was mentioned 121 times. So they clearly were concerned about Trump. Now remember, the reason I looked into this, whether Trump was mentioned, is because this was supposed to be only about Hillary Clinton email investigation. The Russian part kind of bled into it a little bit, but basically this is supposed to be how they handled the email investigation. There's supposed to be another IG report on whether the FBI didn't follow processes and procedures when they conducted the Russian investigation, getting FISA warrants, using the dossier. Now there's even more, well, both cases you should be able to make a case that they definitely were biased and they definitely did things they shouldn't have done, but so far, we're 0 for 1 because this report basically says they didn't do that much wrong. There's stuff they could have done better, but nothing criminal here. Now, here's another one. This is the type of condemnation you get. Allowing Mills and Samuelson to attend the Clinton interview as Clinton's counsel, even though they were witnesses. They should never have been allowed to attend, and they got attorney-client privilege, was inconsistent with typical investigative strategy. No, it's, as I would say, moronic. You would never allow that. Now, why would they allow that unless they're trying to help Hillary Clinton? There's no other reason to allow that. The rationale is they're giving her the benefit of the doubt is what they're doing. They're helping her. They're letting her bring her lawyers in when they were actually witnesses. Not good. And then I'm reading more and more, and I'm seeing that the biggest issue is that from the IG's report's point of view is that Strzok and Page were sending anti-Trump messages, almost trying to downplay it like, yeah, these little lovebirds here, they're sending messages, but maybe we might have to look into Strzok and see if he violated some type of code of conduct. But not the disadvantage, but a limitation on the Inspector General's report is twofold. First of all, the guy works there. He knows those people. He's been there forever. He's buddies with Comey. He's buddies with Mueller. He knows them. He's not going to become a pariah and trash the entire FBI, DOJ, the apparatus, and what they did. He's going to gently nudge them and say, well, on the one hand, you could have done it this way, and I could see how you could also have done it this way. to exonerate her. That's basically the tone of the entire report. The other shortfall or deficiency in an IG report is the guy doesn't have the ability to impanel a grand jury. He can't. He can only talk to people who are willing to talk to him, who are actually still working there. And he's not the Grand Inquisitor. He's there just to kind of see what happens. So the report really was a dud in that respect, and it seems like Strzok is the bad guy here. You know, he sent the "we'll stop him" message, and then he was using Gmail. Okay, so he might get fired. That's probably the upshot of all this. He might get fired. Now, let me tell you what else I found. This wasn't reported. I didn't see anywhere in the media. Reporters apparently were anxious for FBI scoops, and they seem to have been whining and dining the FBI agents. This is directly from the report. In addition, we identified instances where FBI employees improperly received benefits from reporters, including tickets to sporting events, golfing outings, drinks, meals, and admittance to non-public social events. Now, you can have an argument for a tight, deep state right there. There you go. You've got FBI agents working with reporters. So why do you think the reporters know all this stuff? They're sleeping with them. They're giving them information, and it seems. Who knows what they do? But there's no Chinese wall. There's no wall whatsoever. And so they've identified this. They didn't give names. They didn't talk about which employees. They didn't talk about which reporters. But you can guess, not the names of the FBI employees, but you definitely can think of what reporters. I don't mean the names of them, but what news outlets. You can bet that the New York Times or Washington Post has a very full social calendar with people in government, including at the FBI. Now, as I'm reading through, I'm realizing this report reads just like Comey's press conference. You're reading all these bad things that the FBI did wrong or did incorrectly. But then you get, we found no evidence that conclusions were affected by bias or other improper considerations. No, you couldn't have found that. Rather, we determined they were based on prosecutorial assessment of facts and law and past practices. So basically, there's nothing to see here. These are professional men. They're looking at the facts. They're looking at the law, and they're looking at past practices. Now, that goes against what they said up at the top of the thing, that a lot of the stuff here was way outside of the norm. But it's just like with Comey when he gave that press conference. He said everything Hillary Clinton did wrong, and you're listening to it and you're saying, wow, she's going to jail. And then he says, yeah, but she didn't mean it. She had no intent. So no reasonable prosecutor would bring a case like this. After you listen to the whole thing and you say that's exactly the type of case a prosecutor would bring. And here, you read the report and you say, this sounds like a mess. It sounds like a beehive of anti-Trumpers doing whatever they can and pro-Hillary people to get her off and to go after Trump. But see, they make the conclusion that no evidence that existed, even though they show you in the report that the evidence exists. So it's that whole no reasonable prosecutor tone. Now here's another type of that verbiage that they use. If a choice was made by the investigative team was among two or more reasonable alternatives, we did not find it was improper, even if we believed that an alternative decision would have been more effective. So basically, it's mealy-mouthed, milquetoast nonsense when they always took the route that would help Hillary. So it wasn't based on reasonable choices that they had. No, they took the choice that was going to help Hillary in all cases. And in fact, there were certain ones that you wouldn't even think would be choices, and they went that route anyway. And then I started getting comments from people following me on Twitter saying it's sickening, corruption all the way through the oligarchy. And you can see this is basically, this is them, circling the wagons. This is the Inspector General circling the wagons. You could tell the press already knew what was in here. They prepared for this event. They leaked it in the pieces as they wanted it. They controlled the narrative. And then you had, at the end of the day, Wray come out, the FBI director. And then you had also Comey come out, and he's got an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal tomorrow. Now, the other thing that happened during the day, I failed to mention, as part of the preparation of the press, the New York Attorney General decided today was the day they were going to bring a case against the Trump Foundation. Now, this is the same New York Attorney General, Schneiderman, who got booted out of office for apparently harassing in a very significant way a large number of women. And so he's gone. He was very much against Trump. He was on record. He actually did a Samantha Bee program as the great crusader against Trump, and Samantha Bee was doing this mock hero where they did a cartoon of him, and he was the superhero that was going to take down Trump. Well, he's gone now, but in his place, he left his successor, and she decided today's the day to bring the case. This is the same New York attorney who decided there was nothing to see at the Clinton Foundation, and now they're going full on with the Trump Foundation investigation. Now, the reason I mention that is that was also part of the setup during the day to deflect some of the attention to, obviously there's bad stuff in this IG report, but to counterbalance that. So it was a perfect day to bring the Trump, and at one point on Twitter, the Trump Foundation was trending. There was nothing on the IG report, and then they did the little tricks. For the hashtags, they did IG blank report, and then they had IG report. They like to do that so that you don't get a consistent number of people following any particular thread. Speaking of the Clinton Foundation, another thing I found, which I haven't seen reported in the media, part of my reading of the 500 pages, the Clinton Foundation investigation was thwarted. And there was evidence in the report that they had got from other FBI agents. And it was confirmed by Sally Yates. Now, why is the Clinton Foundation being mentioned in the Clinton email investigation? Well, the two are somewhat connected because Hillary Clinton was under criminal investigation for the email, the way she handled her emails. And there was concern, this is fascinating, there was concern that they didn't want to influence the election, this is the excuse, by announcing or having any type of public acknowledgement or even work being done investigating the Clinton Foundation. Meanwhile, Comey's on TV, they're talking about the investigation. So that's nonsense. If they didn't want to influence the election, they would never mention any of these things. Not that that's the route they should have taken. But anyway, the Clinton Foundation, here's what I found in the report from the Inspector General. In addition, numerous witnesses told us that the agents involved in the Clinton Foundation investigation were instructed to take no overt investigative steps prior to the election. Wow. So you're saying they're not allowed to do anything overtly, which basically means they can't do anything. How do you covertly do anything? So then I thought that was like, well, that's a big deal. So then the IG asked Sally Yates, who's working at the Department of Justice at the time, and she says, let me read for you from the report again. In addition, numerous witnesses told us that agents involved in the Clinton Foundation were instructed to take no overt investigative steps prior to the election. We asked Sally Yates about this instruction, and Sally said, yeah, I think there was a discussion about, look, if agents on the Clinton Foundation investigation want to do record stuff and stuff that you can do covertly, fine, but not overtly. And the sort of thought being, we'll address that again at the end after the election was over. And Yates explained that this instruction was explicit because the department does everything it can to avoid having an impact on the election. Now, that's nonsense because, as I just mentioned, they were having an impact. The department was having an impact on the election because they couldn't cover up the fact that Hillary Clinton was under criminal investigation. So now, as I'm reading this, and I haven't finished reading, I'm definitely getting the sense. I already have the sense, and you probably, for listening, you realize that this is they're not looking to cause any stirs here. They're looking to not cover up everything, but they're trying to smooth everything over. I'm getting the sense with this no reasonable prosecutor tone, milquetoast condemnation, circling the wagons, and insisting this is just isolated incidences involving minor infractions. And then I find this paragraph. While the OIG report contains several findings of poor judgment, violations of or disregard for policy and investigatory action that might have benefited from better decision-making process, stop. It's done far better. It contains no finding that any error in judgment. There was plenty of errors in judgment. That's up for debate whether someone makes an error in judgment. But they say there's no finding of any error in judgment. Just like there's no finding of bias. You can't make a finding of no bias, and you can't make a finding of no error in judgment. That's your opinion. You don't make a finding is even stronger than a conclusion. So it contains no finding that any error in judgment, violation of policy, or investigatory action was motivated by political bias. Now you got two things in there. No error in judgment based on there being no political bias. So they just conclude those two things as if somehow the Inspector General can make those determinations or any other improper considerations, even broader. So if there was something else out there that had nothing to do with politics, that had nothing to do with it either. This is critical to the operation of the FBI and the ability of the American people to count on the FBI to act impartial and objective. Okay, let's take a look at that sentence again. This is critical to the operation of the FBI and the ability of the American people to count on the FBI to act impartially and objectively. So therefore, they say, well, then that's what happened. That statement is correct. But if they haven't acted properly, and you can count on them because of what they've done, you don't just say they didn't do anything. There was no error in judgment. There was no political bias because we want the American people to count on the FBI to act impartially and objectively. So therefore, we conclude they acted impartially and objectively. Unbelievable. It goes on further. For the same reasons, it's equally important to note again that the OIG report is narrowly focused on a handful of individuals. They want to make it sound like the whole place is messed up, who are the most deeply involved in running the Clinton investigation and does not generally find fault with the FBI's policies, practices, or procedures as they pertain to investigations, ethical conduct, media context. So we don't have a leaking issue. We don't have ethical issues. We don't have any problem with bias. We have no problems here. Generally, there might be little things here and there. So this type of language permeates this document. That basically, okay, so he said that, but he wasn't the only guy. Well, how is he going to stop Trump? Come on. That's the basis of all this. And yeah, we'll talk to him later, and maybe we'll get him on the code of conduct violation, but no big deal. Now, this is what happens when you have an employee of a department who's tasked to write a report on how his department performed. You're going to get at best this milquetoast condemnation of isolated acts, the general circling of the wagon to defend the department. No bias, no bias, no bias. Now, those of you might remember something else I found in the report that wasn't in the media's things that they wanted you to look at, but something that I have been following. Remember the story about we're going to need an insurance policy. We're going to need an insurance policy. If I'm afraid we can't take the risk if Trump gets elected, and we're going to need an insurance policy. Now, I want to see how that was handled. Well, surprise, surprise, surprise. What does the report tell us? Strzok, Page, and McCabe couldn't recall what the insurance policy text that Strzok sent meant. Now, the guy sent it. He's passionate about being against Trump. He's talking about the insurance policy with respect to Trump. He's talked in other emails that we found that he's going to stop him. And somehow, Strzok, Page, and McCabe scratching their heads and saying, Trump, what? Insurance? Who? Well, I don't know. So you can see And of course, the IG, you can't get him on print. He can't do anything. He just has to scribble down what they say, and he just writes, they couldn't tell me anything. They don't know anything. And he just goes on to his next point. Now, contrast all this IG stuff. So this is why you never want to rely on an IG. You want a special counsel. Look at Mueller. He's going to find someone guilty of something. He's going to get a grand jury. He'll go to the New York District Attorney. He'll transfer cases. He's going to get you. And that's the difference. The IG report isn't going to get anybody. It's an internal document. And they're worried about procedures. They're not out to get anybody. And what's interesting is, and this is the case where you do need a special, these are the people who did the wrong things. If you think about what the special counsel Mueller is doing, he hasn't gotten anyone for what the purpose was that he was supposed to go get people for. He's supposed to find Russian collusion, and he got Manafort on some tax dodge, and he got Flynn for lying about something, and that's about it. And that's why special counsel findings are far more valuable, but also far more subject. They're both subject. If you think about a special counsel is subject to abuse because the guy's just going to get people. You're going to find someone guilty of something. And the problem with the IG report is they can't get anybody. So they're both, neither of them are actually ideal. Then I got a comment saying about Sally Yates saying, trying to make it sound as if they weren't called off from the Clinton investigation. They were only called off from taking overt steps, but a covert investigation was fine. Now, how do you run a covert investigation with the people on the deal? I mean, if you're in the FBI and your bosses and you can't discuss it, and what does covert mean? That you go off in your spare time and you kind of look into the Clinton investigation, but you don't make your findings public, but you don't report your findings within the FBI, and you keep it to yourself. It was like a hobby. You do a covert investigation of it, and then if you find something, you can't go overt with it because we don't want to interfere with the election. So again, you read this stuff and you realize they just accept as answers. There's no follow-up. So for example, if Sally Yates told me that, I would have grilled her on it and asked her, what are you talking about? Explain to me the difference between an overt and covert operation. And what did you mean you would get to it after the election? If Hillary won, would you have then opened up the investigation and announced it? Or did you mean if she didn't win, we'd stay covert? See, this is, again, the problem with the Inspector General's report is they just listen to people, they write the stuff down, but they don't, they have no prosecutorial power, they have no follow-on power, they can't subpoena witnesses, they certainly can't do anything in a grand jury. So you don't get much other than you do get information. So there's a lot of information in the report that's interesting. Now let's talk about the matter issue. Now Comey had said that he was uncomfortable. He went to a meeting, and apparently he brought a couple of his underlings to this meeting with Loretta Lynch. And he said that she said, classic he said, she said, that she told him not to call this thing the Clinton criminal investigation, but to call it a matter. So that became the narrative, at least with Comey and his guys. And the FBI agents working for Comey, after they heard that, they started saying, yep, we're now working for the Federal Bureau of Matters instead of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Now Lynch denies this. She says, I don't talk that way. I didn't tell him that. And again, all the Inspector General does is he writes it down. And he says, he said this, she said that, and what are we going to do about it? The Inspector General, he can't go after Loretta Lynch. What's he going to go after her for? She's not on trial for anything. She doesn't report to him. She never worked for him. She's a private citizen now, and she was the Attorney General. But, so she says, look, they ask her, did you tell Comey I want you to call it a matter? And she said, no, I wouldn't have done that. Not because I don't speak to people that way. Then she says, well, wait. I do remember saying, we typically say we have enough resources to handle the matter. See what she's getting at? It's like, She was talking about it as if it was a matter. I don't know if I used any of the words like the case, the inquiry or something like that. But I do remember saying that, and I think I may have been saying that because, again, I was always careful not to talk about an investigation. So again, you get this inconclusive what happened there, and so now it becomes nothing. It becomes Comey said that she called it a matter, and she says I didn't call it a matter, and some people believe Comey on some things and not on others, so it just fades into nothing. Then at the end of the day, Comey weighs in with his sanctimonious reply. I respect the DOJ Inspector General Office, which is why I urged him to do this review. He didn't have to leak anything to get them to do the review either. The conclusions are reasonable. They love that word. No reasonable prosecutor would do this. The IG report has a lot of this, what they reasonably would have done or reasonably wouldn't have done. We can't reasonably argue with what they've done. The conclusions are reasonable, continues Comey in his tweet, even though I disagree with some. People of good faith, which means people that think like him and then agree with him, can see an unprecedented situation differently. I pray, he's praying now, no director faces it again. Thanks to IG's people for hard work. And now he's got a op-ed coming out tomorrow morning in the New York Times. He's probably had weeks to prepare because he already knew exactly what was in the IG report. Well, then they found out today that Hillary Clinton's emails were declared, 22 of them were declared top secret, and they also found out that there was a breach. And yet she still stumbles, trips, and walks free today. Unbelievable. Then to round this whole thing out, the new FBI director, comes out and we're going to make sure that every FBI employee understands the lessons of this report. He's treating the whole matter like it's just some school kids that messed up or Starbucks employees who didn't know how to handle a procedure, showing up late to class or work. And you can see how this is all put in a nice tight bow. This is not a big deal. I take this report very seriously, said in the news conference. We accept its findings and recommendations. Yeah, you accept the findings that there was no bias, there was no failure of judgment. That's what he accepts. And the recommendations are, maybe Stroke, we should look at him because some of those emails he said were a little dicey. They might have violated a code of conduct. Oh, by the way, using Gmail, they shouldn't have done that either. So let's maybe get the HR involved and see what happens. So according to FBI Director Wray, there's no need for bias training, right? Not like Starbucks. I mean, they don't have any bias at the FBI. Certainly not. They have a finding now from the IG report. There was no bias. There you have it. Now, Trump weighed in, and he didn't weigh in on the tricky guys that I just referred to. It doesn't matter. Yeah, see how they get you? I'm going to get to the comments. I haven't been following them. I've been just talking off the cuff here, making sure that the stream is still working. Trump weighed in on this lawsuit that's been filed against him, Schneiderman's lawsuit. And here's what he had to say. Let me pull up the tweets here. Schneiderman, who ran the Clinton campaign in New York, Schneiderman is the former Attorney General of New York that resigned in disgrace, never had the guts to bring this ridiculous case, which lingered in his office for almost 2 years. Now he's resigned in office in disgrace, and his disciples brought it when we would not settle. The sleazy New York Democrats and their now disgraced and run out of town AG, Eric Schneiderman, are doing everything they can to sue me on a foundation that took in $18.8 million and gave out to charity more than it took in, $19.2 million. I won't settle this case. It's interesting is the Trump Foundation is pretty minor league. It's very small, as he mentioned, $18 million, didn't take in that much money. It's not like the Clinton Foundation, which took in hundreds of millions of dollars while she was Secretary of State, while her husband was giving speeches to Russians for $500,000 and getting donations from all types of shady characters. And Schneiderman brought the case and didn't bring a case whatsoever. So that story was out there, and it was meant to run interference. All right, that's my report and analysis of the IG report. I did read it. I read what they wanted me to read, and I found some other stuff in there. But again, the conclusions are basically, look, every organization's got some problems, but there's no big deal here. All right, let's see what the comments are. Yep, Joe, no reasonable prosecutor or journalist would find bias. Nope. No mistakes in judgment. Actually, there's a finding that there's no bias in judgment. That's the amazing thing. Annabelle, so ultimately the FBI gets to do things any way, old how, and the president can simply not be expected to understand now. It seems to be the case, Annabelle. I mean, they basically, they're their own watchdog. The IG says, yeah, no, that wasn't that good. But look, there's different ways reasonable people can look at this, and that's how they did it. And if there is an issue, the guy will go to HR. I wonder if Comey still has that job. That's unbelievable. When he got that job teaching ethical leadership, Joe's saying, I wonder if he still has that job teaching ethical leadership. Of course he does. He can use this whole thing as how ethics are applied, and now the IG report has basically exonerated him because the ethics are in the bias, and he is found not to have the bias. Making bad decisions is not unethical. So you see what they've done here? Comey hasn't done anything wrong unethically. He's just, maybe he shouldn't have done that. Maybe he shouldn't have had that press conference. Or maybe he shouldn't have given immunity to Mills. That's not unethical in their minds. That's just stupidity. Not stupidity. It's just unreasonable. Or maybe a reasonable person could say it's reasonable. Annabelle, the FBI is the attacked over our ruling class. Our job is to obey and keep our eyes on the ground, not dare raise them in scrutiny of our overlord. Well, unfortunately, whenever you have a power structure, the power structure can be used or can infiltrate and be used as a weapon. And that's been going on. That's not new to the Obamas, the Clintons, the Trumps. It's Nixon had an FBI hate list and wanted to use the IRS to go after people. When you have the accoutrements of power and the ability to use them, they do use them. Anyone who thinks Hillary didn't get special treatment says Joe is in denial. Don't see how. What she did is, not only did she do whatever she did with the emails, she did it ongoing. And then she destroyed 30,000 emails, and then after the ones that she didn't turn over certain ones, and she smashed them with a hammer. The fact that she just had the private server in the first place is just outrageous. Someone's not part of the ruling. We throw it in jail so fast, anything they could get on you. Well, there are cases of a seaman, taking pictures of the ship. He didn't mean to do anything. They arrest him and throw him in jail. Hubzilla, see, nothing happened. Well, you predicted that. A lot of people predicted it on the feed. Mark Battaglia, Salivate Metal. They basically said nothing's going to come of this. There is no rule of law, whether at the lowly trial court level in a small town, through the state court of appeals, the federal courts, the DOJ, etc. Unfortunately, it is somewhat true. It all depends on who you get. I mean, you get a good judge, you get rational law of people who believe in that, but then you get other people who just want a result, and because they're in power, they're going to get that result. Look at the Supreme Court case with Obamacare. Whether you're for it or against it, it's irrelevant. That case showed there was no rule of law. The Congress explicitly did not make Obamacare a tax. And in order to make it pass, they basically said all the rationales about the government forcing you to buy something, that's unconstitutional. And then you would think, okay, well then Obamacare is unconstitutional. And then they said, well, if it was a tax, it would be fine, which is fine. The only thing is, it wasn't a tax. It wasn't written as a tax. It was purposely not written as a tax. So they knew they couldn't pass it as a tax. And so the Supreme Court decided, but if it was a tax, then it's constitutional. So we don't want any problems here. So we're going to say, you could have written it as a tax. You didn't, but because you could have, it's fine. Now, a real rule of law person would have said, they would have put that in what they call dicta. They could have struck down the law as unconstitutional, and then say, if you want to bring it back, no guarantees, but if you bring it back as a tax, it's probably okay. That's how, if you're really following the rule of law, you would have done it. Now, he knew, Justice Roberts, that if he told them that, the new Republican Congress never would have passed that again as a tax, because they were already pretending to want to repeal it. Teapot calling kettle black, read private non-government emails. Exactly. He's investigating Hillary Clinton about private emails, servers, and so on, and he's actually doing it himself in violation of his employment contract. Vina, there's no rule of law at home, abroad, exceptionalism. Nobody in the oligarch will ever go to jail. That's right. Res ipsa loquitur. That means the thing stands for itself. People arguing over Republican versus Democrat are under mind control. It's all an illusion to make you think you're within defined parameters inside a box. Yes, that's the matrix, isn't it? Two things needed. Rule of law, not the rule of law. Powers that be have succeeded in dumbing down people to the level that Smaulgld has to make weekly Moronica episodes highlighting how bad it's gotten. Got a moron here. Honestly, money, if you don't have these two things, there is no hope. That is true. Money definitely buys power, or at least lawyers. The Moronica intro is priceless. Uh-oh, we got a moron here. Yeah, what are non-public social events? Again, see, you don't get to follow up. Hubzilla is talking about the part I found in the report where FBI employees were treated by reporters to sporting events, dinners, meals, and non-public social events. Who knows what that is? Joe Lazaro says, the red team versus the blue team mentality is a trap to make you think you have no choice but to support your team no matter what they do. And that's what you get. It's funny to see people who are so dyed-in-the-wool resistance or Trump. You see the resistance people, they're in their minds. They're convinced Trump, like, he's Putin's puppet. They just heard that. They believe it. And you can't change their mind. And Trump is bad. And anybody who voted for Trump should be punched in the head because they've caused whatever problem they think that Trump has caused. And then you got the Trump people. They think that he walks on water, and any criticism on him is some type of conspiracy. So that is what happens. You join a side, and you're not interested in the truth. And look, I see this in the gold and silver community. They want to believe gold is set to skyrocket. So they'll believe any nonsense that some pumper peddles. And then they get mad at me when I say, well, that's not true. There's no basis for that. And then if somebody says, oh, I sold my silver, he's a traitor. You see, you people form these tribes, and they want to believe. They're not interested in the truth. They're interested in being proven correct, or at least somebody supporting what they want to happen. Operation Tailpipe. Lionel Nation says the IG report is a nothing burger. Praying Medic thinks the IG report is to give the FBI an excuse. Well, I agree with Lionel Nation. There's really nothing in there. Well, they've made it to be nothing. It's not that there's nothing in there, but unless they do anything about some of the things that they find, they figure, well, just let the FBI clean house and it'll be fine. I don't know what you mean by give the FBI an excuse. Hubzilla, judges will always recite the statulous whether for Kentucky domestic relations to Kentucky medical malpractice and turn around and ignore them. Yeah, well, that's where you get no justice. I got to run, but good report, Lewis. Thanks for joining, Joe. My new passkey through life, says Annabelle. I didn't mean to do it, and no reasonable prosecutor would indict me. That's a great. You don't even need a lawyer. He said, are you not a reasonable person? You can't indict me. No reasonable person, not even prosecutor, would even think that I've done anything wrong. Then, that Joe, indeed, it's intentionally red-blue in most countries with the Matrix origin. I got the Matrix already. Origin in the cult practice. Tricky guy, Hubzilla, so you're saying judges need I didn't know you're very funny there, tricky guy, with the words. That means Kentucky, not KY. Who's the biggest name that will actually get indicted? Asked Tricky Guy. Why not the biggest names? Because of the actual Civil War. You would think McCabe, they recommended a criminal referral on him. I think what they probably realized they might have to do is they can't let everyone skate. So I think Stroke is a perfect scapegoat. They could say, he's the guy that people are against because he's the face of it. He's the one who said we need an insurance policy. He's the one who said we're not going to let Trump become president. And then McCabe is also on record saying F Trump, and first we do this and we do that. And then he lied. So they might give those to him. But Comey, to Joe's point, he's going to walk into the sunset. He'll be giving ethical lectures for decades as long as he lives. He'll be on Twitter citing scripture. So he's not going anywhere. Zero big names. Clinton is out and lost. She's nothing. Tricky guy. Too much damage. No need to use a beef. Takes longer. Potential good outcome of all this is that more people will start to ask questions, search for the truth, wake up. Yeah, they will, but as I mentioned, I think people are less interested in the truth and more interested in the result. And that's the danger. And if you think about what Comey did, he wanted a result. He wanted to get Hillary off. Yeah, he'd like to make it appear like he was doing it ethically and in a truthful manner, but it comes down to, if you just want to get into philosophy with Callicles and Plato, might makes right or not. And Callicles believes might makes right, and I think he makes a very cogent argument if you ever want to read that dialogue. No, if you get your way, you win. I think a lot of people think that way. Tricky guy, even the mainstream media had to mention the IG report, too big not to cover up and spin. Yes, and if you joined us early, maybe go back and listen to from the beginning, we talked about how they prepped for this, how they try to run interference, but then they try to get you to focus on what they want you to focus on, and then they leak stuff in advance, and if it's bad, they leak it so that they're the ones who found it, not you, and then they wrap it up at the end with their the conclusions of the day, and having Comey come out, and then on Twitter, and then him writing a op-ed in the New York Times, and then having FBI director come out and say, we stand by the IG report. It's the Rush Limbaugh idea. When Bill Clinton was in, Rush was on fire. After Bill was out for Bush, Rush became zero. This is the idea, keep interest in Trump. I don't know whose interest it's in. Keep talking about the Dems. Meanwhile, Trump sold the state of West Virginia to China and fracking. You can kiss the mountains goodbye. Then he sold uranium-222 in Utah to Canada, but went up there to put on an act to Justin, laughing all the way to the bank. Yeah, well, you can tell that definitely politicians are not working for you, that's for sure. You had Clinton with uranium, whatever the Uranium One scandal. I'm sure Trump makes deals that benefit him and his buddies. That's the nature of politics. But what I find interesting is that people think they're Democrats who think Republicans do this, but the Democrats don't do it. And then there's Republicans who think Democrats do this, but they don't do it. And they only believe that their side has all the moral right on it. It's like God is on our side. Democrats or everything is on. We do the right stuff, and all the Republicans want to do is kill babies. And the Republicans think all the Democrats want to do is kill babies in a different way. So that's where I think the mistake is. You get this mindless partisanship where people refuse to see that their own side does anything wrong. And in fact, the classic argument that really annoys me is if you want to say someone did something wrong, and then you ask, did he do something wrong? They're not going to answer the question if they know he did something. So if your guy did something wrong, and let's say your guy is Obama, he said, did Obama do X, Y, or Z? And the first thing they're going to say is they're going to realize, yeah, he probably did. And they're going to say, but Bush did this. And then you see the same thing. It doesn't matter who you are. If you say, did Trump do this at the Trump Foundation? And the Trump guy's going to say, yeah, but at the Clinton Foundation. So you'll never get somebody to even think that their own person has done anything wrong. Their immediate response, it's childish. It's like when you get caught. A child gets caught stealing a cookie, and you say, Johnny, did you take the cookie? And he says, Joe took one too. That's got nothing to do with whether you took one. All right. Let's see. More. YouTube sucks. Can't post. Test. No, it doesn't suck as much as you think because I can see what you wrote. Tricky guy. You yourself just referred to as a matter. Uh-oh. We got a moron here, Tricky. Finjaho. I think some people might yet be woke to the fact that they rule by above the law oligarchy. We saw that. Actually, public is too stupid. Public is too stupid. Lazy. Uninformed to take action. You running for office? That's not going to work. This inaction will only invite more outrageous exoneration and sleazy behavior. Probably, though. Right, infighting over Operation Tailpipe. Hubzilla, it's a global phenomenon, divide and rule. President Obama or Hildebeest will never smell a handcuff. I guess they won't. I look for Obama. He's tangentially mentioned. The one thing Obama did in this whole thing was he said, Hillary's done nothing wrong. He concluded, like he knows. Funny thing also, not funny, but first thing I thought of when I first heard about the Hillary Clinton email thing in 2015 that she's using a private server was she was probably communicating with Obama with that. Well, he had to know. So he tacitly authorized her to use a private email server. and under the Latin respondeat superior, you have to owe to the master, he's responsible for that. And no one has ever gone after him for that. I'm very surprised. I'm willing to allow Trump $1 trillion earned under the table. See, that's the point. That's the might makes right, as long as he drains the swamp. That birth certificate of Obama was proven fake. The difference today compared to a few decades ago is that people have been dumbed down. The concentration of media and industry has increased into fewer hands to control the narratives in society. Well, that's true, but it's also not true because of the internet. There's more people out there with a microphone and more people that can actually get their points of view across. So I guess it's an offset. But it is true, there are fewer media companies and there are more concentrated in them. Oh, then he writes, yes, the internet has been a leveler, hence the attacks on social media and censors. That's right. If they can eliminate that, then they can just have the one microphone bleeding out what they want you to know. Tricky guy, big worry. The Clintons got away with so much because everyone else is doing the exact same profiteering due to cronyism. They're all guilty and the Clintons will take them down too. Silver Wolverine, Comey should be locked up with Hillary. Poppy stuff. They need to go after the 13 Russians. Yeah, you know that story. I think I covered it the other day where the 13 Russians showed up in court and they said, okay, sue us, bring it on. And they said, no, well, we're not ready. And they said, what do you mean you're not ready? And then the judge made him go ahead. And then the 13 Russians said, I don't know if it was the 13 Russians. I think they sued 13 different Russian entities. The Russian entity that showed up in court said, okay, well, what do you got? We want this government. They said, well, we can't give it to you because of national security. So it's turning out to be a joke what's going on with that. Don't fear, Gus is here. Good to have you on, Gus. You might have to go back and listen to this over because we're nearing the end here. Salivate Metal, Smaulgld. There's a female fan in here. A multitude of gratitude to her, Poppy stuff. There she is. Salivate Metal. Same people, same interest fund, both parties. Salivate. Thanks, Sal. Hey, Sal for long here. You can't win with the swamp still. Hey, Sal, I did call you out earlier. I said you predicted this. I don't know if you heard the beginning of this. Salivate Metal, popular guy here tonight. Blame it all on Pep's rally. Obozo was using the exactly, Rob. I just mentioned that. He was using the private server as well. He had to be, and he had to know about it. First time I heard about it when I saw it in the newspaper. BS. First time you heard about it was when she sent you an email and you responded to it. They'll all try to play tricks with your mind. All hail for Sal. Yep, Salivate says, yes, he was corresponding with her via private server. Her emails need to be subpoenaed with a multitude of gratitude. The FBI and Mueller have now shown they are not adverse to a dawn raid, so they should have, that's right, they could have taken the DNC server. See, they mentioned this in the report. Well, you know, they didn't do things. Reasonable people might not have done this. Nonsense. It has to do with bias. If you're out to get Hillary Clinton and you have bias against her, you would have banged down her Chappaqua door so fast with 40 SWAT team agents. But they didn't do that. Why? Because of bias in favor of her. LOL says, I don't know what she's laughing at, but Sal for long, that's the long and short of it. And Silverine says, at Salivate Metal. Well, I want to express a multitude of gratitude to everybody who joined me today. I want to thank you very much. And please join me every night at 8 o'clock for an update. Tomorrow I'm going to have Philip Kennedy of Kennedy Financial, so please be sure to check that out. Thanks for joining me. Have a good night.